Stop mooching off me, you deadbeat. For more than 2 decades, I thought I'd been fully devoted to Thomas. But now, is this what he's really been thinking all along? I wasn't clinging to him. I was just trying to be a supportive partner. Yet now, words fail me as my resolve dwindles. Ryan's an adult with a job now. You don't need to depend on me anymore, do you? Thomas continues, his voice rising sharply. But that's enough. I don't want to hear your excuses. His words hit like a hammer. In that instant, I realize it's over. My emotions will never reach him. Something within me snaps. It feels like the thread of love that once held my heart together has broken, and with it, my feelings for Thomas start to fade. Moments ago, we were married, but now he's like a stranger. It's obvious he's been using me, never truly loving me. Otherwise, he wouldn't have the audacity to cheat and kick me out. I don't care about him anymore. No, I have to bring him down completely. I gather myself and lift my head, meeting Thomas's gaze squarely. My name is Mila Smith, a 50-year-old housewife. I've been married to Thomas for 25 years, and our son Ryan just graduated from college and started working. With parenting responsibilities easing, I've been eagerly anticipating pursuing my own interests. However, there's a major hurdle in my way: my relationship with Thomas. He's far from an ideal husband or father. It's difficult to find any redeeming qualities in him. He cheats, and his contributions to our household finances are minimal. Can't you at least contribute to the household expenses? I often confront him about this, only to be met with defensiveness. Perhaps it's hopeless. Maybe divorce is the only solution, a thought that's been growing on me lately. Yet broaching the topic of divorce isn't easy. Complicating matters is a promise I made to my father-in-law, currently hospitalized. He's been incredibly supportive, and I feel obligated to endure things for his sake. While I want to honor his wishes, my desire to end the marriage is becoming stronger. Caught in this emotional tug-of-war, I find myself reminiscing about happier times, ironically sparked by a misfortune that befell my father back home. My family owned a small diner. My father managed the kitchen while my mother handled service. The food was always exceptional, but my father struggled with the business side. His sole aim was to serve satisfying meals, rarely concerned with turning a profit. For him, as long as customers left full and content, that was fulfillment enough. That's how our business operated. Naturally, profitability wasn't our strong suit, so finances at home were always tight. Even as a child, seeing satisfied customers made me proud. That's why I never questioned my dad's methods in running the diner. However, during my college years, disaster struck. The company supplying ingredients to our diner went bankrupt due to the recession. We had already paid for this month's supply. If this trend continued, we faced the possibility of shutting down. Our diner was already on a precarious financial edge with no extra funds to spare. Seeing my parents so disheartened made me anxious too. But as a college student, there was little I could do, and I doubted we could get a refund from the bankrupt company. Closing down seemed inevitable. Then, one of our regular customers said, "Shut down the diner. With food this good, that would be such a shame. But with our supplier bankrupt, we'll be in debt." "Then let me help you personally. Use this to get back on your feet," the customer offered, lending a substantial sum to my dad. "We're so grateful. We'll definitely pay you back." "Don't worry about the money, just keep making delicious food," the customer said, leaving swiftly thereafter. Later, my dad switched to a different, larger food wholesaler that offered better prices. Thanks to this stroke of luck, our family diner avoided bankruptcy. About a year later, my dad and I went to repay the generous customer. While they conversed, a young man approached me. "I heard you borrowed money from my dad." Turns out, he was the son of the man who had lent us the money. His name was Thomas, and he worked for his father's company. "You're pretty. How about going out with me sometime?" "With you? Why not? Think of it as thanks for the loan." We were genuinely grateful for the help, but my dad had already properly expressed our thanks. There was no obligation to go further. However, Thomas whispered threateningly, "Ungrateful diner girl. I could spread that around, you know." "That's not fair." I couldn't argue back. Even if he spread rumors, I figured it wouldn't hurt me directly, but it could cause problems for my dad. And what would the diner's patrons think? These thoughts prevented me from refusing Thomas's proposal. I didn't like it, but I decided to endure it just this once. So, I agreed to go out with Thomas. Surprisingly, it turned out to be more enjoyable than I expected. Thomas was engaging to converse with, and he knew many enjoyable places to visit. The spots he selected had excellent taste. Despite my initial negative impression, I began to think he might actually be a good person. That was my mistake. I quickly fell under Thomas's influence. Being with you, Mila, is enjoyable. I feel the same way. A respectable, sincere girl like you, Mila, is someone I consider marrying. Swept away by his seemingly sincere words, I entered into a relationship with Thomas with marriage on my mind. Over time, Thomas continued to manipulate me in various ways until several years later, I found myself married to him. Back then, I had no inkling that it was all a trap set by Thomas. He appeared genuinely kind, and I believed his love for me was real. But it was all a facade. Almost immediately after we married, Thomas's true nature emerged. "Here's this month's paycheck. Make sure you manage it well," he said, handing me an envelope. The paystub inside was handwritten, a rarity even back then, but not unheard of during the early days of widespread computer use 25 years ago. "It's over $2,000, so this should be about right," I muttered to myself, trying to make ends meet with that modest amount of money. As our married life progressed, I started noticing discrepancies. It was Thomas's daily routine that troubled me most. He left the house at the same time every morning but returned at unpredictable hours, claiming he was busy with various responsibilities as his father's successor. "Could you at least call before you come home?" I'd ask tentatively. "Stop nagging." "Fine, I'll call," he'd retort sharply, leaving me even more uneasy. I began to wonder if he was enjoying himself elsewhere, or worse, if he was having an affair. But I couldn't confront him. The thought of his angry response kept me silent. Despite my suspicions, I stayed quiet. Eventually, Ryan was born, and I had hoped that having a child would bring positive change. However, Thomas's behavior remained unchanged. Reflecting now, that was when thoughts of divorce first began to stir, albeit vaguely. Then, while Ryan was in middle school, I received a call from my mom while I was out shopping for dinner. "What? Dad's in the hospital?" It was news about my father being hospitalized. I rushed to the hospital in a panic. "Your mom exaggerated on the phone." My dad chuckled heartily when I arrived. I felt relieved, but in that moment, a realization struck, and my heart skipped a beat. Oh no, I forgot to call Thomas. When I checked my phone, it was flooded with missed calls from Thomas. When I hurriedly called him back, I heard his irritable voice. "Where are you? What are you doing? Come back and make my dinner." "I'm sorry, my dad." "Ha, your dad? Your own father?" Thomas's tone turned stern. I replied timidly, "Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized." "What does your dad have to do with anything?" "You're my wife," Thomas shouted, and I flinched, closing my eyes. His yelling frightened me, but I knew I couldn't remain silent. Summoning my courage, I spoke up. "Isn't it natural for me to worry about my dad? It's the least I can do." "Shut up. Don't talk back to me." "No, let me speak. If it were your own father, wouldn't you rush to him?" I confronted Thomas. He fell silent suddenly. I thought putting yourself in his shoes might make you understand, but his response was beyond anything I could have imagined. If my dad were in the hospital, I'd ignore it. After all, I wouldn't be troubled if he wasn't around. I was speechless. It had to be a lie, but I couldn't deny it. After much hesitation, I told Thomas, "I'm different from you. Sorry, but you'll have to eat out tonight." That's all I managed to say before hanging up, still in a daze. From that moment on, my faith in Thomas began to erode. It was then that I finally realized the happiness from before our marriage was just an illusion. Now I understand. Thomas didn't want a wife, he wanted a housekeeper. I muttered to myself, feeling a wave of sadness wash over me. But I couldn't linger in sorrow. That's right, if I'm going to get a divorce, I need to start preparing. So, I began preparing for divorce. A few years passed, and then my father-in-law was hospitalized. His condition was serious. He might not recover. I shared the doctor's prognosis with Thomas, but he appeared unaffected. "So, it's going to cost money. Is money all you're worried about? Don't you understand the situation?" I confronted Thomas. "I understand. I'll talk to my brother," he replied, reaching out to his childless, married brother, hoping he would share the burden of the hospital expenses. "Why can't you pay for it yourselves? We have Ryan and Mila to consider." "It's tough for us," Thomas deflected, as if distancing himself from the issue. His attitude reminded me of when my own father was hospitalized. It became clear to me that Thomas didn't truly care about his father either. I couldn't bear it any longer. That's enough. I'll figure out how to manage the hospital bills myself, I asserted firmly. Don't forget what you just said, Thomas shot back. I nodded resolutely. In the end, my determination led to us bearing the cost of my father-in-law's hospitalization. Moreover, due to his illness, my father-in-law resigned from his presidency, and Thomas assumed his role. However, Thomas resented my intervention. From then on, he seldom came home. Even when we needed to discuss Ryan's future, he ignored my calls and remained absent. Dad's not coming home again tonight. I'm sorry, Ryan, for the trouble. It's okay. I don't care about Dad. I want to go to a university in New York. That's right, you mentioned that. Don't worry about the tuition. I'll handle it soon enough. Ryan's plans to move to New York for university were settled. As expected, Thomas didn't even bid him farewell. With Ryan gone, the house felt empty. By then, Thomas was only returning home about once a week. Can't you deposit a bit more for your father's hospital bills? What? I already transfer over half of my salary. That should be enough for you, Thomas retorted. His claim rang hollow as I knew the amount he transferred was merely a fraction of his income. It was clear he was lying, but I lacked the energy to argue any further. Years passed, and then I received news that Ryan had landed a job. Ryan has a job now, so perhaps it's time to bring up divorce. I had spent these years meticulously preparing for divorce, leaving only the task of finding the right moment. Where and when could I broach the topic without causing too much disruption? These thoughts consumed me. It's not about causing trouble or not, I mused with a bitter laugh. One day, after visiting my father-in-law in the hospital and chatting with him, I returned home. As I attempted to unlock the door, I realized it was already ajar. Could it be a burglar? I cautiously peeked inside. Then I heard the TV and Thomas's laughter emanating from the living room. So, Thomas is home. I sighed in relief and entered the living room where he sat, laughing loudly while watching TV. You're home. Yeah, thought I'd tidy up around here. Tidying up? I questioned, scanning the room. Upon closer inspection, I noticed some items were missing. Something seems missing. Yeah, I threw some stuff out. Your stuff? You threw out my things? I gasped and hurried to my room. It was bare. My computer, TV, even my favorite mug, all gone. The bed, everything had disappeared. What's going on? I didn't need them anymore, so I got rid of them. You didn't need them. What am I supposed to do now? I raised my voice. Thomas frowned, avoided eye contact, and sighed. What can I say? I'm tired of supporting you. What? I'm your wife, I protested. He grew defensive and raised his voice. Do I have to spell it out for you? Stop depending on me, you deadbeat. For over 20 years, I believed I had been devoted to Thomas, and this is what he thought of me. I wasn't depending on him. I was simply trying to be a supportive partner. But I couldn't find the strength to articulate that as I felt my resolve crumble. Thomas continued, now that Ryan has a job and is an adult, you don't have any reason to rely on me anymore, do you? Enough. I don't want to hear your excuses, I interrupted firmly. It became clear to me that it was futile. My emotions were not reaching him. In that moment, something snapped inside me. It was as though the thread of love binding our hearts had been severed. And with it, my feelings for Thomas began to fade. We were a couple just moments ago, but now he felt like a stranger. He had been using me all along. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly cheat and try to drive me out. I don't care what happens to him anymore. No, I have to take him down completely. With determination, I lifted my head and stared directly at Thomas. Got something to say? Nothing. If you want me to leave, I'll do just that, I declared, slamming the living room door behind me and making my way to my room. But to my dismay, there was nothing left of mine. Not a single piece of clothing remained. Don't bother looking. I had the junk collectors take everything away. Which company? There's a flyer right there, I said, picking up the flyer from the floor and dialing the number. While on the call, I told Thomas, I'll make sure you regret this before leaving the house. The call connected shortly after. Explaining the situation, the collectors understood immediately. It seemed they had sensed something was wrong with Thomas's actions. They assured me they had kept everything they collected intact. I'll be right over, thank you, I said politely and hung up. Later, I visited the collection company. After expressing my gratitude, I had them move my belongings to a storage unit I had just rented. Relieved that my possessions were safe, I felt a sense of calm, at least momentarily. He shouldn't think he can get away with this without consequences. I muttered through gritted teeth as I called Ryan. Briefly explaining the situation, I added, "So, I've decided to move out and pursue divorce. That's the plan for Ryan and me. Is that okay with you?" "Ah, okay. Bye." Ryan hurriedly ended the call. He seemed intimidated by my intensity. Was I that angry? I wondered, putting my phone back in my purse. Heading straight to a nearby business hotel, I knew I needed some time to gather myself and plan the next steps. In fact, I had already decided on a place to move to start a new life after discussing divorce with Thomas. Well, it's just that my plans got moved up a little. Honestly, I wasn't in trouble. It was just a matter of being 2 weeks ahead of schedule. 2 weeks living in a hotel. What a waste. I had no other choice. As a housewife, I couldn't help but feel it was extravagant. Maybe I should bill him for this hotel stay anyway, I muttered, starting to work on my post-divorce plans. About 10 days into my stay at the business hotel, while having lunch, Thomas called me. As soon as I answered, he started shouting. You've stolen my money." "Huh? What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. It's about my dad's hospital bills. The hospital just called demanding payment." "Ah, that's what you meant," I sighed, responding, "You should pay it. It's no longer my concern after you kicked me out. But I've been transferring living expenses to you. You should pay it from there." "Yes, but isn't that passbook now with you?" I retorted calmly, knowing full well there was no money in that account, which made me smirk. "I have the passbook, but there's no money in it. That's why I'm saying you stole it." "I haven't stolen anything. Don't lie. Who else could use it?" He seemed oblivious to the fact that the transferred amount was far too little. Exasperated, I explained, "There was barely any money from the start. If there's no money for hospital bills, why don't you use your allowance?" "My allowance?" Thomas started to panic, clearly thinking I didn't know about it. Since the beginning of our marriage, Thomas had been giving me handwritten salary slips to conceal the fact that he was pocketing a portion of his salary for himself. Essentially, the money he skimmed was his own allowance. "I once asked your father about your salary amount, so that's—" He looked puzzled, but I pressed on. "But he told me. So, I knew you were taking money." After I said that, Thomas fell silent. There was a long pause, so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he suddenly raised his voice again. "What's wrong with me spending the money? I earned it. It's your fault for using up all the money." "Yeah, sure," I retorted, unimpressed. "That's it, we're getting a divorce. I'm going to demand alimony. You'll pay back every penny you used," Thomas declared. I couldn't help but smirk. I had him right where I wanted him now. There was no escape. "Great, thank you. I've been wanting a divorce too. Come over to my place for the divorce discussions." "What? No, I mean, you want a divorce, right? I'm also prepared with evidence of your infidelity," I stated, knowing he must be sweating bullets even though I couldn't see him. His voice betrayed his panic. "Evidence of infidelity? What are you talking about?" he exclaimed, clearly rattled. "No use playing dumb. I have photographic evidence." "Photographic evidence," he repeated, his voice now trembling. I fought to hold back my laughter. "I'll give you the address. Let's meet next Sunday to discuss it in detail," I said, quickly giving him a certain location before hanging up. I've successfully cornered him for a divorce. Now, if only I can get him to apologize, that would be the tricky part, I mused, bracing myself for the confrontation ahead. On the promised Sunday, I arrived at the meeting place ahead of schedule, scanning the surroundings eagerly. Spotting Thomas out of the corner of my eye, I called out and waved to get his attention. "Over here," I exclaimed. Thomas looked around, visibly surprised. "Here," he muttered, clearly puzzled. "Yes, this is the place I gave you. But this mansion, whose is it?" Thomas asked, peering behind me. I grinned and pointed towards the impressive mansion worth about $2 million, complete with a sprawling garden, 3 floors, a basement, a theater room, and luxury cars parked in the garage. "This is my house. Isn't it new and beautiful?" "Your house," Thomas repeated in disbelief. "You plan to live here after the divorce?" "Yes, I started building it a while ago," I explained matter-of-factly. Thomas, who had always underestimated me as just a housewife, seemed utterly stunned by the revelation. Guiding him inside, I pushed him gently towards the living room. "Let's get started with our discussion. This is my lawyer," I introduced, gesturing to the lawyer who was waiting inside. But Thomas appeared too distracted by his surroundings to focus. He glanced nervously around the room, seemingly more interested in the luxurious setting than our conversation. He paid no attention to the photos of his infidelity laid out on the table, and his responses were curt and unresponsive, making our discussion frustratingly unproductive. Eventually, Thomas asked in a hushed tone, "How did you afford this house?" "I bought it, plain and simple," I replied calmly. "Liar, a housewife can't afford that," Thomas retorted, his disbelief evident. "To buy a house worth $2 million, you need an annual income of at least $300,000. I have that kind of income," I asserted confidently. "I earn that much. Any issues with that?" "But how?" Thomas trailed off, clearly bewildered. "I started by casually assisting a friend with her business, and it unexpectedly grew into this," I explained. "It all began a few years ago when my father's hospitalization pushed me toward divorce. I began preparing for independence, starting with finding employment. Securing a suitable job wasn't easy, so I turned to my close friend Sarah for advice. "Why not join me in my business?" Sarah proposed. "Business? What kind of business?" I asked. "Land-based aquaculture. We create artificial pools to farm fish, a sustainable method that avoids ocean pollution," Sarah elaborated. "It has its challenges, but it's a green alternative to traditional aquaculture." Sarah's father pioneered this method, and she's taken it forward. "I've been working there ever since," I continued. As I got involved, the business flourished. My role primarily involved negotiations and administrative tasks, and Sarah found my contributions invaluable. Eventually, I earned a promotion to an executive position. It was partly luck, but as they say, luck favors the prepared, I concluded with a slight smile. Listening to my story, Thomas slumped in despair. Then suddenly looking up, he said, "Okay, let's forget about the divorce talk. How about we start over?" I couldn't believe what he was suggesting and responded coldly, "Excuse me, save your sweet talk for when you're actually sincere." "No, I mean it. I really want to try again with you," Thomas insisted earnestly. But knowing his sudden change of heart was likely due to my financial success, I replied sharply, "I won't be with someone who cheats and neglects their own father." "No, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly well. I've been covering your father's hospital bills with my own salary because what you gave wasn't enough," I interrupted firmly. "You hardly cared to visit him." My lawyer then steered the conversation towards alimony. Thomas remained silent throughout, looking downcast. Eventually, with the lawyer's prompting, he signed the divorce papers. The alimony was set at $60,000. "Now that we're divorced, you'll take care of your father's hospital bills yourself," I asserted firmly. Thomas nodded reluctantly, unable to argue further. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the proceedings came to a close. Finally, I ushered Thomas away, almost pushing him out. "It's over now. My only regret is not getting an apology from you, but there's one final move I have in mind that might prompt you to apologize." With that thought, a smile spread across my face. A few days later, on my way home from work, someone called out from behind, "Hey, Mila." I turned to find Thomas standing there. "Don't address me so casually. We're divorced now," I said sharply. "What the hell did you do?" Thomas was red-faced, glaring at me. I didn't realize what must have transpired. "Ah, so that conversation happened at the office," I thought. With a smile, I replied, "What do you think I did?" "Don't play games. Tell me, how did you manage to get me fired?" Thomas fumed, stamping his foot. His reaction was almost comical, and I couldn't help but smile. "Well, isn't it your own doing? Getting caught cheating with the company's secretary." Thomas had been having an affair with his secretary at work, thinking he was untouchable as the company's president. Immediately after the divorce was finalized, I informed his father about this. His father, initially disappointed by the divorce, became furious upon learning of Thomas's misconduct. I even showed him the photographic evidence, which only added to his anger. He then said to me, "I'm considering transferring all my company shares to you, Mila." To me, wouldn't Thomas's brother be a more suitable choice? "No, I want to give them to you. Use them to remove Thomas from his position as president," his father insisted. According to him, his company was structured as a corporation where shareholder meetings were pivotal for decisions like appointing presidents and executives. Despite the board of directors having some decision-making authority, the company wasn't large, and his father held the majority of shares. This meant a single shareholder wielded significant decision-making power. In smaller companies, it's typical for the president to control the majority of shares. If I obtained all his father's shares, I would have the unilateral authority to make decisions. However, the decision to remove Thomas wasn't mine alone. I informed his brother about acquiring the shares. All I did was reveal Thomas's infidelity. The rest was his brother's call. Your brother acted in your best interests. Why did he heed your words? I countered, watching Thomas crumble before me. He began pleading, I'm sorry, please forgive me. No, I stand to lose everything. No job, nothing. His predicament wasn't my concern. It was all his doing. Even if you apologize, I won't forgive you. Please, I beg you, Thomas pleaded, prostrating himself. I turned away. I'm sorry, but there's nothing more to be done. Why? He implored. I've sold the shares to your brother and his wife. I want nothing more to do with you, I stated firmly. Thomas began sobbing, but I ignored it and walked away. Following his removal as president, Thomas had to leave the company. Had he been an ordinary employee or executive, he might have retained his position. However, his entry into the company relied on his father's connections, and his arrogant demeanor persisted throughout his tenure. As for me, since the divorce, I've been able to focus more on my work. I don't think I'll remarry, but there are a few men among my colleagues. Maybe a good love will come my way again. As I pondered this, Ryan called me. I'm bringing my girlfriend over next time. That's wonderful news. I'm excited to meet her, I replied warmly. Despite my own marital challenges, I want Ryan to avoid making the same mistakes. Yet I have confidence in him. He's far more composed than I ever was.